I'm a pretty bad designer. So what do you do with bad designers? You make them a manager. There's actually a pretty simple answer that I think everybody reacts to. Don't try. Where the next step for me was really about holding space for innovation. All of our corporations, all of our systems, all based on metrics and KPIs around performance that no longer make sense. Corporates need to be brave, and that bravery comes from individuals. And everybody knows who's the boss. And it's not
her.
me.
She's the boss.
It's not me. It's not me.
This is Create What Matters.
Hi everyone, my name is Leticia and welcome to Create What Matters. Today we are here with Toby Haug and we will be exploring a little bit of our chapter, which is Impact Beyond Profit. Today we're going to cover a little bit of culture, we're going to cover a little bit of corporate and maybe sailing. I don't know. It's going to be unscripted, it's going to be fun and we're going to see where this goes. I'm also here with my co-host Ale.
Hey everyone, nice to see you again. Thank you for watching us on one more episode. It's gonna be a good one, I'm sure. Let's kick it off.
Shall we?
Yes, I'm ready.
So before we start, we always like to start with the question of like, what does, at this moment, in this time, what does really matter to you?
Oh, that's a pretty broad question.
I know.
In any sphere or
personally or professionally, you can go wherever you want.
So I find myself in a moment of transition, moving out of a big global corporate after 21 years of doing amazing stuff and really enjoying it, and finding kind of that next chapter, which is not financially driven. So you really can make different choices and you really have to introspect and kind of start understanding, hey, what's motivating me? Where can I add value? Where do I want to put my time and energy, to what degree? And I love that moment of transition because this is not the first time and I'm sure not the last time that I'm going to be going through this. And I think all of us have those moments of transition. So I'm kind of just sitting in that moment, trying to feel it and see where it takes me. And to be honest, I'm actually reconnecting with the things I have been doing in the corporate world and saying, that's it. It wasn't fake. It wasn't just due to the construct I was in. I was truly doing something that I really found valuable. I enjoyed, and I'm so looking forward to doing more of that.
And what was that you were doing? What was the role that you had for so many years?
So this is a longer story, especially how I got there. But my last role was within a company called SAP, which is a huge multinational software company with 110,000 people.
Let's just say that again. 110,000?
110,000 people.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. In 191 locations around the world. So it is very much, we're talking about a level of complexity and internationalization and different cultures. And that's what I was working on, was a cultural transformation project called Humanizing Business. But my actual role given to me from the board was Chief Happiness Officer.
What a beautiful name.
Yes, it didn't last very long for multiple reasons, but...
Why not? Tell us.
So...
Do you want to go back? Should we go back a little bit? Like, where does this story begin and how does someone get into humanizing businesses?
Yes. Yeah.
And what does that mean?
Exactly.
So, I mean, it's very similar to, I think you guys also a background in design. And when I joined SAP 21 years ago, it was first as a designer and then as part of a research and innovation team. And they realized very quickly I'm a pretty bad designer. So what do you do with bad designers? You make them a manager. Right?
Okay.
So as we were growing this research and innovation project, I became a manager of designers, and that kept expanding in my role. And what I realized that moving from design, which was very UI, UX, user related, to management, which was then very people and dynamics, that really spoke to me. I honestly can remember exactly where I was in a car at which stoplight where I realized, you know what? Today, I really helped somebody, not just a project.
That's so nice.
And that's where it clicked. That's where, for me, the whole movement started. And this was over 20 years ago. Around the same time, I'm sure you guys know this, and you'll be nodding when I say this wonderful approach called design thinking came onto the world. And it was obviously made very popular from IDEO in California, but it really got kind of on the world stage because a rich guy called Hasso Plattner put millions into bringing it into creating D schools, the HPI D school, also starting in Stanford and then going around the world, and bringing it into corporate worlds. This guy got his money because he was one of the founders of SAP. And at the same time, he was bringing design thinking into SAP. And I was one of the early alkalites. I'm not sure what the right word is, but, a believer in it. And really starting to practice this within the context of complex corporate environments. And I was hooked. Like that was it for me. So I was doing this as a manager of design and designers. And that's also where I transitioned from, as UI, UX design, we were very much pushing design upstream. So it wasn't about pixels anymore. It was really about the process and then came design thinking, which really brought a new dynamic about how people, diverse perspectives work together to understand a problem before you start designing for possible solutions. And that product and that process was not easy, but it was very successful within SAP. And that's where at the end of, well, not the end, but at some point when that went to market, which was an interesting experience, the board came to myself and my manager for, a manager, friend, mentor for 14 years.
Oh, wow.
We worked together. And they came to us and said, would you take this design thinking approach that we've practiced within SAP to make this new product and take that out to our customers and partners worldwide. And that's when a next chapter started, which was for me to transition from design systems, UI, user-focused, to more team and team dynamics.
The system.
The entire system. And I realized I was really good at that. Much better than I was as a designer. Absolutely. And we established innovation spaces called the App House, which still exists today. And that really expanded worldwide. And all of a sudden, so after a couple of years of success, I was running larger organizations. So that's also where the next step for me was really about holding space and holding space for innovation. And I wasn't in all these amazing projects. I wasn't doing the design, but I had people and I was creating an environment. And from the very first day, we started working to make sure that those app houses, those spaces were very, very unique, that they were not hierarchical. So the team worked in a very different way. Everybody who came, our board members, the board members of some of the biggest companies around the world, they also had a different feeling in the space. Why? Because we were living the space differently. We were working together in a very different way. And that's when I realized, that's culture. I was holding a bubble of culture within the big conglomerate of SAP. And something that was just attracting people, and like most of SAP really wanted to be part of that. So we had what we called like a semi-permeable membrane, right? So we did a lot of projects as a team, but we always invited other parts of SAP so that we could keep kind of spreading that way of working.
That's awesome.
Different type of leadership, different type of project management. Everything was very different, and I loved it. And I actually ended up becoming better known for how I was holding that space, running those teams, than actually the amazing projects and successes that team was having, until a couple of years ago, the board, who was very often in our space, said, corporate culture is really important. It's really top of our strategy, but we don't actually know what to do. But we know this weird, wacky guy in the App House. So they gave me, at the time it was hip and cool, to say, hey, pilot the role of Chief Happiness Officer. And I gladly took that. However, they said, can you do it in a sales environment? So they wanted to make sure that they took me out of my little bubble.
Was this HR or like for the overall organization?
It was the overall organization. So the whole HR, that's a whole different topic within corporates.
How do you connect that with the HR? Like, how does a chief happiness officer? I keep trying to put you in, or is it like side by side?
So they didn't know at the beginning.
Okay.
And we had an escalation to the board member of HR at that point of time.
Okay.
Saying, so let me take a quick aside. Roughly, I know I don't want to be unfair to anybody here or any of the listeners, but HR within corporate environments made a strategic decision about 14 years ago to become a service. Not part of the strategy. So what do you do with the service? You outsource them, you optimize them. And where HR in most corporates these days is very operational. It's running HR systems. And even the name human resources is very different. And so, however, the amazing individuals and human beings who went into HR actually went in there because they wanted to work and have positive impact with people. What many of them, unfortunately, at this point are doing are managing exceptions and processes and compliance topics.
Yeah.
And here comes Toby from the board, who he gets this fun thing, and it escalated. I remember this call with the board member for HR, where the other HR heads were saying in the call, you know what the problem is, Toby? You get to do the things we want to do, but can't. And then there was silence in the call. And that was the honest truth.
Of course.
And the board member at the time said, well, let him give it a chance, right? So for me, I had a couple conditions where I thought it was very important to start this project with. And that was that I wanted to report locally to part of the business. Why? Because culture is something that gets developed every day with every interaction between every employee in the business. As soon as you make it part of HR, it becomes outsourced. It's like, oh, HR should do that for us.
You create a silo, no?
A silo, and everybody has to feel part of this this change. So I came to Barcelona for multiple reasons. It's a small, at the time it was 220 people. Now we're about 540, so it's grown quite rapidly.
6 years ago.
6 years. Yes, 6 years ago.
Okay.
Exactly. Oh man, it goes a lot faster than you think. And I realized very quickly that I made two main mistakes. Well, one of them was the word happiness. People interpret that differently. It was kind of a hip, cool thing. It's great for dinner parties and cocktail parties. You know, people ask you about it.
Yeah.
But when you really want to enact and encourage cultural transformation and change, it's a hard word to use because it's associated with a fleeting, temporary emotion rather than, hey, the complexity of what culture is. And that's where within 1 month, I threw that title out the window, haven't used it since, even though it follows me for years. And
made a mark.
It did.
Yeah.
And I rebranded everything to start the Humanizing Business Initiative.
Okay.
And that clicked. Those two words, which unfortunately people don't always associate with one another, that really got people thinking and talking. And the second mistake I made is coming in with a title. I kind of knew this, but I made the classic mistake. What happens with you come in, I'm coming from the board with this cool title. It became about me and not us.
That's what I was going to say, because you changed it from Chief of Happiness to the
Humanizing
businesses, which is beyond you, right? It's not about you.
Exactly.
Someone else can come in and then you can make everyone part of that mission or that group.
Yeah, and that's really important. And I knew that from my App House days, that when you're taking away hierarchies and working with some of the more modern organizational structures, it's ego and layers and titles really get in the way of the interactions that you want. So I made the classic mistake. I stepped back. I haven't used a title since, but that's where it transformed into Humanizing Business. And that's, to come back to your original question, how I also moved from design, which was kind of user-centric, to design thinking, which was team and organizational-centric, to Humanizing Business, which is much more around culture and the complexity of culture within a certain context. And the context, in my case, was a big global multinational, but realizing that there is not just one culture, even for a company like SAP. Every single location has its own culture and different mix and different challenges and different opportunities. So SAP has 2 locations in Spain, a larger one in Madrid and the digital hub here in Barcelona. We're in the same country, but we have very different cultures. So that's also part of the story.
I bet they're like microcultures and micro-tribes, depending on even the departments, the context of
500 people in one place is a lot as well.
And so we are now, I say we, but I still associate myself very closely with that. But as it continues to grow, we actually have a growth plan to go towards 750 people in the next 2 to 3 years. We're reaching that critical point where the tribal, getting to know who is in your system and who's playing which role and who you can reach out, it's getting too complex. So we're probably going to have to take a step back and look at examples of multiple groups that are aligned, but they each one have their own identity and connection and pace. I think it's a fascinating topic.
And so you went from, in a way, getting guidelines and a framework that was design thinking in a way for teams and for innovation, for a purpose specifically for business, to which is already a little bit, if you think about it, abstract at some point. And then you abstracted it even more to work with something that is actually as you said, something very micro and macro as well. It works both on the micro and the macro aspect. How do you create new frameworks, and what does it entail? Like, because usually when you think about culture, you think about how do you develop culture within teams, and each leader in a way is going to develop their own culture within their own teams. So how do you maintain those elements and those systems working autonomously, but at the same time trying to create a culture that can connect globally, like locally, regionally, and then globally?
Global, as they say.
Yes.
I love the question, and there's actually a pretty simple answer that I think everybody reacts to. Like, don't try. Don't try to change in its completeness very complex performance systems, right? SAP is successful because it's been over 50 years performant in the market. You can't just change all of that. So what do you end up doing? You create little experiential micro interventions to try. Hey, does that work for you? Does that feel good? Does it have a positive? You test little things. You let people do it. I'm not doing it for them. I'll set it up. I'll work with them, and then it starts. I'll give you a concrete example. Again, coming back to kind of the entire concept of autonomous teams and removing hierarchies. Part of that is what role do managers and leaders play? Let me just make the quick difference, right?
Okay.
We have managers that manage outcomes.
Okay.
We have leaders that lead people and organizations.
Yeah.
Sometimes, if you're really lucky, you can get kind of both in one person, most often not. And organizations need both. And they do themselves a great disservice when they try to mix them up. Like now all managers are leaders. Right?
Put them all in the same box.
Yeah. So we need both. But they're different competencies, different personality types sometimes. And their type of role in the future organization that we want to have, where people are taking more ownership and understand, the role of a leader or manager changes. I started off with talking about the theory and this is what's happening in the world and don't we want to be like this? I was in a sales environment. They're like, yeah, we get it. But I got to, deliver my numbers, right?
Yeah.
So I also had to come to these little micro interventions. And as an example, started off with one team that was open for it. There was a new management position open. And so I ran a quick workshop with the team to say, let's write the job description of your future manager.
Oh, interesting.
That's so cool.
Yeah, easy, simple. That's no big deal. But the first time where they're asked to do that. And then the cool thing starts happening. The psychology behind that is you got a group of people together and everybody has a different image in their head of what a good manager or leader is.
Yeah, for sure.
And then so there's a huge amount of empathy. Like somebody could be quite young and say, I need somebody who's really good at this task and can teach me how to do it. And somebody else next, I don't want that because I know what I'm doing. It's like, I can teach you that. So you start creating little interesting dynamics in the team. Yeah. And when you get to that final job profile, it's not the final one. The final one that the team has created, and of course there's other stakeholders that have to add something to that, but the team has learned something, and whoever gets that position gets a piece of gold. That is like a job.
That's a map.
Yeah. This is what we need to be better.
Exactly.
Right? Can you play that role for us? And that's an hour, depending on how big the team is. It was an hour workshop, but with a massive impact. And then that started like, oh yeah, this worked well. And then the next one, it started to kind of establish itself as a norm
in an organic way.
Yeah. So that's just one example of many of little micro interventions without trying to change entire systems. Because honestly, any change maker in complex systems gets extremely frustrated.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It takes a lot of energy. So you need those small wins also for your own personal motivation.
And Toby, what is one thing that you've learned about humans? I'm sure lots of things. Maybe if I could ask this question that has surprised you about humans, that maybe you thought it was different the way we behaved, and something that you would change if you could in our behavior. what is one thing that has been shocking for you and something that has been complete, that you say, you know what, if we could change this, our systems, organizations, or teams, or work, or outcomes would be better?
Yeah.
What would be those two things?
That's a good question. I'm going to just go with the first thing in my head.
Yeah.
I am fascinated how people, every single human, we're very, very social. Like, let's take away any extremes in a society, but most people are very, very strongly adaptive to the system and the norms around them without even being aware of
By
it.
default.
By default. If this is wherever I am, if this is kind of the common way we sense that, and we adjust our behaviors to become closer to that norm.
Is it because we want to fit in? Because we need to, we're social animals?
I think so.
In a job context, we also need our job for survival?
Yeah, there's all of that, right? You know, you need it. Maybe you look around and say, well, I guess this is successful. This is what's expected. It's coming from
We follow the crowd also.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of energy to fight against a norm. And so it's also easier just to adapt to it, right? So I think that's interesting. And to answer the second part, changing the norms that become, like, what's the tipping point of how you can create a new norm that people are more like, oh yeah, I want to do this more than that, right? And I really strongly believe in this, the hierarchies we have around us are reinforcing norms that are so unbelievably outdated. You know, they come from Tayloristic, from 120, 140 years ago, which came from an industrial age where you had to cut things down for efficiencies and for
Yeah, you had to. You were working on a factory and producing an outcome that was very manual and not.
Yeah. And also everybody, like, it used to be, even back then, you'd have a craftsman or craftswoman.
Yeah.
140 years ago. Anyways, who knew how to create this amazing complete thing.
Yeah.
Come the industrial age, you actually saw the decrease of that craftsperson,
Yeah.
who then, and it got cut down to, okay, like, I hammer this one thing, this other person screws that part in, and it became industrialized.
Yeah.
And nobody understood the complexity, and hierarchies were built to manage that efficiency.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
In fact, it is so counterproductive because, especially in the technology age, those performance systems only made sense when the surrounding environment stayed relatively stable.
Yeah.
As soon as the environment changes, the system has to change, and hierarchies are not built for flexibility. So I really hope when we're talking about creating new norms that people can adjust to, it's also understanding the need to create more autonomy within an organization that can sense and change and still be unified enough to all be going towards that goal instead of, you know, some people walking this way. I think we have lots of examples of how to do it. We have very few examples within big corporates.
Yeah.
And I get the question very often, Toby, why do you even stay in that? You know,
Yeah.
but I think we were talking about it before.
Yeah.
Little changes in a corporate affects thousands of people. And I also have to admit, I really like the fact that if you can make change in a corporate, other people listen.
And we've been talking about this also. I think there needs to be change coming from corporations. There's power, there's money, there's influence, there's people working. Corporations are not going anywhere.
Right.
And they're responsible for change, for creating change and waking up to being responsible, accountable for creating different types of change. Not only sustainability, not only human rights, not only equality, but also change in how people work.
Yes.
And leading that change. And I think there was also a previous conversation we had around how in terms of impact, there are a few bold organizations that take that jump and that are brave enough to take the lead.
Yeah.
So I think more and more there, in many aspects, corporates need to be changing and evolving and breaking and questioning these norms of how come are we still having the mindset of working as if we were in a factory when in fact we have completely evolved, and we're also evolving to a phase of technology where a lot of the future of work is changing.
Absolutely.
So how come are we not challenging that and changing that? What are the new systems? Do you see these conversations happening right now in SAP or with peers in other corporations?
So let me add one little piece to it, and that'll inform why I'm going to say it the way I'm going to say it. Is part of what was part of my mandate when I was running the Humanizing business was also to do it publicly, externally, so that other companies could see, hey, SAP is cool and doing new things,
framework.
right? And so when I came here and had some representational duties with the government and other companies, I found many other big companies in Barcelona that often had hubs or whatnot, but they were all on their own journey, a similar journey, very interested. And so about 3 years ago, I established a network of companies, which is maybe not the most creative of names, but is the Humanizing Business Network. And we meet every month, and every time we have a different topic so that we can influence each other, learn from each other, support each other, even if it's just a shoulder to cry on. So
You created a movement.
we're working towards it. It's really great, amazing people. I've learned so much from these people, and it's great to see that corporates need to be brave, and that bravery comes from individuals, and they need the support of each other to say, yeah, that's really cool. Like, oh man, I wish I could do that. You know, and then you start seeing reciprocity. Like, oh, can you talk to my board members about what you're doing? Like, yeah, if you come and talk to mine. You know,
that's so cool.
there's a synergy happening.
Yeah.
But it does take bravery, which is on an individual level.
Yeah.
And we're also seeing these mega trends around the world, right? Let's start with COVID. Everything swung my way. Humans and, you know, people, we take care of each other.
Was it?
And
They called you. They were like,
absolutely. That was like,
okay. How do we maintain this, but digitally now?
and so not just the
Yeah.
digitalization. I always have trouble with that word.
Digitalization. Yeah.
Oh, you'd say that much better than I do. You would never think that I work for a software company. And however, that focus on each other, how are we doing? Is everything, you know, and now we've actually seen the pendulum start swinging the other way. Why? Because a lot of, well, not a lot, but most of these corporates are living within a capitalistic system with shareholders and the pressure for growth and profitability and so on. So it's kind of swinging back towards being squeezed.
Yeah.
So you need even more bravery, right? And you see some companies being like extremely brave. And we're seeing a big group of companies that are not tackling the system head on, but doing like what I was trying to do within SAP, small, localized, experiential prototypes and changes with the hope that it'll grow into a new norm.
Okay.
So I see both happening.
And seeing culture for so long now, what could you say are elements or pillars that make a culture thrive? And what do you see are as pillars that make them completely like...
Boom.
Yeah.
I hate to have this as an answer, but it really is the truth. And it sounds so quaint, but trust.
Okay.
Right?
No, but I don't think it is.
It's so important, but you hear it all over. But what is trust? How can you get closer to it? What
Kind of like this abstract concept at times.
It is.
How to land that.
And it's built through everyday interactions, right? And it starts with even how you find talent, how you hire talent, how you support them. And so I think also having metrics around some of these changes are also very important for any organization. Otherwise, it remains theoretical. And all corporates, and I think most people are, you know, like, let's measure trust. It doesn't
And
really...
how do you measure trust?
Yeah. And it's not just the sentiment, but actually the positive or possibly negative effects of trust. And we did quite an analysis of this and came up with a framework called the organizational revenue model. Why? Because I'm part of a sales organization. They really want to have revenue.
Yeah.
And the second is sales is quite straightforward. You have one KPI, one outcome, and that's revenue.
Yeah.
And it's tracked. Everything's tracked. So I actually... Now, to be completely fair, it wasn't me. It was my secret weapon, and that's my wife. So she's my perfect complement in the sense that she's also where I'm dealing with culture and people, and she's working with data, numbers, and logic. And so we worked on this.
Not at home. She works at SAP.
She works, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Thank you. That's a very good point. We met at SAP 20 years ago.
Yes.
You coexist in the same organization in different roles. Okay.
Yes, yeah.
But also a compliment as a couple, right?
And everybody knows who's the boss. And it's not
her.
me.
She's
It's not me. It's not me.
It's undeniable. Okay.
No, but so we came together to kind of looking at the historical data of this organization and then saying, if we could alter little pieces of it, what would the revenue outcome be? Now, give you some concrete examples of a sales territory. Makes a certain amount of money. If that's not filled, if you have an open headcount and you're looking for somebody, it's not making that money. So if you can shorten the amount of time to find somebody, you can quantify that. Okay, if we find somebody a little bit faster, right? SAP software, our processes, our customers, our everything is complex. So it takes about 2 years for salespeople to become fully performant in their role. But if somebody stays 1 month longer in their role versus somebody who's just starting, you can quantify the difference. And so on and so forth. We have various metrics. And at the time, for 220 people, we came to about 10.5 million euros of revenue with small little tweaks in the organization. Now, the fun part is, and so when I can show those numbers to a sales organization, the ears open up. Oh, cool. That's where the journey really started.
Yeah.
And now the fun part is, how do you do that? How do you create that sense of trust that people, that sense of freedom to grow? And we started establishing new ways to find and attract talent, not through the classic, recruiting ways, but we actually got our own young talents to go to universities and present this is what it's really like. Authenticity, right? And that had a huge funnel. We also noticed, this surprised all of us, if you have an open sales position and you have two candidates, one is, let's say, a student who's never been in sales before, but has been at SAP versus an experienced external salesperson. The student or the non-sales person internally, 50% more performant, 50.
Why?
Because they feel comfortable. At that point, they've chosen SAP. They know, and this is leading into the next part, is they have the network. Because all of these processes and structures require that you know who to go to when you need help for what. So having that network, that sense of belonging, incredibly important.
Absolutely.
And so that influenced how we hire from within, how we trigger getting our own people to self-select who makes sense in this culture. And then we had a 1 week cultural onboarding. So not HR onboarding, here are your benefits, not in your team, but really this is what we're about. We start every day with a mindfulness practice, really to show we mean it. This is something that we will all need in our lives, and it's a norm.
What an example, really bringing the human to the business.
Yeah, and then everybody, so we had all the teams come, you actually get to see the people, you know what they're doing, you understand how it all works together, and that's part of the productivity curve that you can measure. How fast somebody upskills. If you can just increase that by a little bit, and how do you do that? Through this cultural onboarding. They know who to go to. They understand the bigger picture. They're not swimming and trying to orient themselves even longer, and so on. So there's, I don't want to keep talking about the organizational revenue.
It's so interesting. No, but like something that there's a question that is coming to my mind, and it's should and have you worked with different metrics when it comes to measuring human and employees and teams' performance? Have you broken any of these metrics? Have you incorporated new ones with these new system and movement that you're creating?
So there are, like SAP and all the big companies, we have the classic feedback loops. 4 times a year, one main one, people surveys, and everybody answers. Interpreting that into action is always a challenge, right? To say, what did the organization say? Okay, how should we act as an organization? What did my team say? How should I change as a leader? That takes a lot of coaching and mentoring and a lot of time that most organizations don't take. So it becomes a cycle where people, like after a couple of years, they're like, nothing has changed. So I'm not a huge fan of those centralistic, I don't even know what to call them. It's not sentiment analysis. But I like the more honest, time-bound, closer types of feedback loops. I think those are the things we need to encourage more of for that. I'm not sure. Did I just answer the question, or did I bypass the question?
I understand that you look more into qualitative than quantitative, but I understand that also what I understood from your conversation and your talk, correct me if I'm wrong, is that you need the quantification of things to prove that the work that you're doing actually impact businesses.
Yeah.
But for you to define what are the actions and what are the small things that you're going to change, you need to look in detail to what people are actually saying when they are talking and they're giving feedback.
Right.
So it's less about the metrics on a day-to-day basis, and it's more about the metrics when you have to go to have the board listen to you or open the ear to you.
So that organizational revenue got things moving. We tracked it twice a year because it takes time when you try something to see if it has an effect. It doesn't happen automatically. And it lasted about 2 years. And then we realized we don't need this anymore because it's like people got it. They're like, yeah, what you're doing is important.
Okay.
You know, so it wasn't anymore about the metrics,
Okay.
which was great, right? The other fun thing is that went to the board of SAP, reviewed that. And I don't know how, but the board gave it to our supervisory board saying, hey, look, we have a clear connect between employee experience and revenue, which was great, right? So we with that little bit old Barcelona, we could actually do some pilots and some things that got attention, but also got people to think, okay, that this is possible. Yeah.
That's awesome. And one of the things I wanted to go quickly back to the happiness thing, because I think that not because of the title itself, but the word.
Yes.
Because I think that when we talk about work, and this is where maybe even like we have different ways of seeing this from different generations, because you've been there for 20 years. Which generation are
what do you
from?
want to say? No,
that's not what I want to say. I just want to say there are
Gen X.
different Gen X, different generations.
Ignore that
We have different generations being part of the organization.
Yes.
And of course that happiness is, even the word happiness and even the meaning of happiness can differ so much.
It does.
In different generations, right? So I think that it was, in a way, I understand that as a first thought of like, oh, we should always be happy at our work, but also understand that from some people, it's not necessarily about being happy. It's just about having a job, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't need their work to fulfill their life. They need a job.
Yeah.
So how did that play into changing and thinking about culture? And how do you see the new generations coming in and looking at the work that you were doing and clashing with boomers, X, Ys, and all of the other letters of this beautiful soup?
Yes, exactly. I love that because so there's happiness, and let's also use the word purpose, right? That's thrown in very often. Do you guys know the, I assume, very fake and made up story, but a good example of the builders of Notre Dame, the cathedral?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
I'll run through it quickly.
Entertain us.
So so they interviewed a builder of Notre Dame who was carrying a heavy stone from the quarry to where they were building Notre Dame originally in Paris, and they asked him, "So what are you doing?" And he said, "I'm carrying a heavy stone." Then they asked the next builder, and he said, "I'm feeding my family." And he asked the third, and he said, "I'm building a church to God." Everybody doing the same activity, associating a different purpose based on how they perceived the work they were doing, right? Same thing in everyday corporate worlds and work. We're able to associate a meaning or a different meaning or a higher meaning to the same work we're doing. I think structures can help us do that. If you really know what I'm doing, that's the person I just helped. Now, that I think is changing between generations. And I'm like really excited about this topic because I mentioned in the Humanizing Business Network, every month we have a different event and different topic. The next one is hosted by MediaMarkt here, and they chose the topic Gen Z in the workplace. A lot of corporates are like, these Gen Z. Oh my God. They're just,
How do we handle that?
How do we handle them? Like they don't want to work. They can't manage the stress. They want to be CEO in a week, after joining, like these classic. And then we're planning on positioning the opposite side, is just to say, over generations, you've created an overperformance system where it's squeezing people out, always doing more with less. I don't want to be part of that.
Yeah.
Right? Or I want to understand the impact I'm having with my time and life energy. Like, help me understand the purpose of
My
it.
contribution
My
here.
And it's like, my growth is important, that I'm constantly learning. And it's not about the next title. It's about that after I've become good at something, I want to become good at something else.
Yeah.
It's not always getting up and down the hierarchies.
It's a journey also. It can evolve. It doesn't have to be fixed. It's a little bit about fixed and growth mindset, you know. I'm not in this role forever because I myself am not forever. I'm not in this company forever.
And I think that's a big change.
It is a huge
people
shift.
Aren't in a company like I have been for
You're an
21
outlier.
years, yes. But I think the role of a company and a job has changed dramatically. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. I don't know which way it's going to go. I've had my own personal experiences with younger generations, and you're always like, I can't make these guys happy. Whatever it might be. And so I'm looking forward also for myself to learn in that conversation.
Yeah.
And where's the future going for you? If you could predict, you said maybe it's hard to predict how it's going. We have different generations clashing at the same time. Times are changing. What is one prediction you could do in terms of
all of
people?
that? Well, all of that fades in comparison to what I'm pretty sure is just around the corner and we're completely blind to. And that is, everybody knows how quickly technologies like AI, robotics, and so on is progressing. Let's just use AI now as kind of a... The experts are really predicting that within 18 months, we'll reach the tipping point that, it's no longer about generative AI, it's no longer about bots, it's now about agents, and it'll evolve to the point that agents in a corporate environment will be easily able to do repeatable jobs that right now humans are doing. So even if it's more than 18, let's say, the technology is ready in 18, but even if
3
it's
years, 5 years.
Yeah, 2 to 5 years. We will reach a massively critical moment where it makes no sense to start comparing the efficiency of a human versus an AI doing the same thing.
In repetitive tasks, as you said.
But what is a repetitive task? Repetitive task is I've done something, I've done it 10 times, I've done it 100 times. At that point, and that happens pretty quickly in corporate environments, very quickly, an AI can take that, start iterating, and that efficiency curve that we've done for generations using humans. How do we do that process better? It was humans in the system. If that's now AI, what are the humans going to be doing? What are we going to be? You can't even measure apples to oranges. It is the moment where, an automobile was not just some, one guy puttering around the street, but it became a technology that was open to the mass, and a horse. Are you talking about how fast they are, how far they can go? No. AI is going to totally change that. And all of our corporations, all of our systems, our KPIs, even how we're managing on the market, stock market, to our shareholders, it's all based on metrics and KPIs around performance that no longer make sense. So what comes next? I don't know. I'm very don't ask me.
And it's fair to even to answer with a question. I can ask a question and you can totally answer with a question.
I'm fascinated,
especially with this changing times. We don't know what is going to happen, and we'll see about it in 3 to 5 years. But what is certain is that the speed of change is there.
Is there, and we're talking about entire systems of change. And so I really want to start having that conversation about where, like classic design thinking, first go broad, understand the problem from various, start having many concepts before starting to focus on something. I'd like to go broad and really understand where do people, could they see themselves in that? Where on one hand, it can be scary. On the other, it can be liberating. That's the word I was looking for. With saying, okay, if I don't need to do that repetitive task,
what can I do now?
What do I want to do now? What brings value? Value for whom? Value towards what outcome? For every company is going to be different. And how do the systems around us honor that.
Yeah.
Because it can't just be, oh, we all become, SAP, it becomes 50% driven by AI. Oh, so we'll fire 50% of the workforce. That can't be the answer. It won't be the answer. It'll be a shift of focus, and I see it as an opportunity. I hope.
Go ahead.
No, so we talked about amazing things that you have done. And we talked about like all of the great outcomes that you're taking out of this. And I also understand that in hindsight, it's also a place of gratitude and appreciation because you are leaving this world now, right? But what are the things that you are actually happy to leave behind? Because
are you leaving behind? Because that was the question that I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
How long? Are you going to stay there?
I have 3 more months.
Okay.
So I took a very, very generous severance package, which I'm very grateful for, and have 3 months to gracefully exit and hand over. And but I'm going to stay in the realm of corporates and run the Humanizing Business Network as future steps. These topics, these experiences, I want to spread as much as possible, get it into as many hands as possible, but also make obvious that big corporates are changing and they want to change, and there's great people in them that want to affect that change. So that's where I'm going to be going pretty quickly. I will be very, very happy to leave aside reporting of all types. Oh my God, there's just obviously the more systems.
You've had enough.
And there's just reporting, meetings, just the information flow is massive just to keep yourself oriented within a big corporate. And I've even now, as I'm taking steps back, starting to realize like, wow, that was a lot of mental energy I was putting, and I didn't realize it after 20 years.
Mode.
Yeah. And I was, I think, doing it quite naturally.
You got
after
used
20
to it.
years and knowing them and knowing, I heard a name and I could associate it with some organization. And if you're just coming into a corporation, oh my God, that's going to be so hard. And how much energy is needed for orientation. Very happy to leave that behind. That'll be much simpler.
You're going to be sobering up from...
Yes, I'll be going on detox.
I would definitely
hierarchy detox.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be, and first, if I can make any prediction, and I don't, we know each other, but not that well, I would say to this point, it's going to hurt in the beginning. Because I think it's going to be one of those things that you're going to miss the craziness. You have already reduced your hours, so you don't work as much anymore. If you can comment on that, it would be nice. But also, like, coming from someone that was in a very high competitive corporate space, and I went to something that was completely mine, where I could pace myself, learning to go from that crazy pace to a normal one I was addicted.
Yeah.
And it was, withdrawal. I went through a withdrawal phase, and it took me 6 months to readjust to a new pace, because you're so used to it that at some point you're like, why am I? And there's this really nothing related. I'm just going to go completely on a tangent here. There's this woman that I really like online that she doesn't romanticize this motherhood. She just had a baby, and then she does videos about like, it's been now 4 weeks since the baby. They say that I'm going to feel like this. When is it going to happen? And then she goes, is that the baby? Is that the baby? And then she keeps, and then she's like, some point she's like, stop rocking. Because she's always rocking and she's always rocking the baby. So I feel that is kind of like the same feeling. You will be rocking and it's going to be like, is that the baby? Is that someone calling me?
Is that my manager?
It is very personal, I think. It's so personal to your personality, to the context of corporation. I personally did not feel withdrawal.
Okay, good.
You were like, I'm free.
I was so waiting for that moment to come, and I actually felt liberated. I had a shock of values, a conflict of values with the corporations. I was working for an amazing corporation as well, but at the same time, I think it's super personal to each and one journey. Mine was a conflict of values, and it was like, this is not where I can be. So when you know that, and that you know that it is very scary to the other side of the world is unknown. So we working in corporations is like, no, we have it good. We have our checks and we're getting paid, and this world is safe. You have that illusion of safety, which COVID completely broke. I think there's no such thing as safety. It's only an illusion that corporations and companies create. But I think it's tied to values when you say, I'm done. This
Yeah.
is not for me.
Yeah,
And you can be completely out in the open and say, you know what, this freedom and this level of, if that is who you are, of course, of capacity to create your own world with your own rules, as scary and as uncertain as it is, it can also be incredibly freeing and liberating.
Yeah.
At least that was my experience.
Well, I do understand. I have to say that's not my situation.
Yeah.
And
Again, it's
out of a
personal.
couple things, one is SAP is a German company. And that has been extremely employee focused, more so than anything I knew in the US. The second thing is because I started in a research innovation project and was always very close to the board, I've had immense chances and the luck to be actually create my own roles and my own focus and always be able to associate it back to, of course, what SAP's strategy
So you had
and
a lot of
outcomes
freedom.
are. Lots of freedom, like coming here and starting the Humanizing Business Initiative and all of the. I'm not like, oh my God, get me out of here. It doesn't fit to my to who I am. I will be. I mean, however, it's a big 110,000 person global structure, and there's a lot of structures. And the next training you have to do, okay, and the next reporting, and then that's what I'm going to be happy for. Not the sense of connection or purpose or values. I felt actually that was very fairly done for a company like SAP size. It's just the hierarchical mental load and the politics, of course. The more hierarchy, the more levels, which I don't believe in.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
There's
about, we
that.
haven't spoken of that, politics. There's always politics.
Of course.
It's part of the game.
And I've always disregarded people in any level of hierarchy if they start making it about themselves or their little politics, because I'm too well connected within SAP and I can always bring it to a higher level. But I think also, we didn't talk about my life before SAP, but even before coming to SAP, I was working with Nobel laureates in my 20s. I was working at SAP in my 30s with our CEOs, in my 40s with the CEOs of the world's biggest companies. So there was, when you start realizing we're all humans and you don't need a title or a hierarchy to be a leader or to create change, then people who play that game, I lose value in my eyes. And so I don't take them as seriously.
Yeah.
Lose value and respect.
And respect. I think that's the better word. And
It's a world with a lot of ego.
Yeah.
of course. And actually I got in trouble at one point because I published an article many years ago about egoless management. And I loved it. It was a great conversation. Yes.
Yeah.
No, egoless. So how to be a manager without ego, and not it about you.
Yeah.
And I love. I think I'm going to be happy to leave those types of things behind. There's always that. You can't get away from in hierarchical systems with people who know how to play the game and play their position and their power cards. That's one thing.
You're a sailor.
Yes.
You sail, and you and your wife, you are both certified, and you can travel international waters,
Yes.
which is pretty cool, in my opinion.
Yes.
You plan at some point to live on a boat?
On a boat?
Okay. Is there a parallel to sailing and navigating politics in a business? If there isn't, you can say no. But I always found, is there any learnings that you can take from one and apply in the other?
I think you have to understand how sailing works a little bit. If I want to go there and the wind is coming directly against me, I can't sail there. You have at most, when you're sailing, 30 degrees here and you have to go up, which is very different than if I want to get there and the wind is coming from behind me and pushing me, and then you're really fast. That's also politics. It's understanding, if I'm going against the wind, I have to be really clear that I want to get there. Because it almost takes like 3 or 4 times longer to tack up into the wind to get there than you'd.
If the wind doesn't get stronger and you never
doesn't
get
stronger
there.
And so on.
Yeah.
So be cautious also of where your wind is coming from politically in a hierarchical system.
It's about sponsorship as well. If
It
you're
is
not being,
find that sponsor. Make sure it's still aligned with the company, because if you're really at a clash, I think what you were talking before, a clash of where you want to be and what change you want to make in the world with what the where the company is, then it's probably better to choose a different path and not stay in that company. But I think being able to navigate politics is like being able to navigate the wind. You can do it always, but sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder, and sometimes it doesn't happen at all if it's really 180 degrees straight into the wind.
I think that I mentor a lot of young women, and especially in this environment, they find a lot of difficulty reaching higher levels because of how the culture is built, with no policies, a lot of sexism, and a lot of patriarchal values. Now it's me. That are in place. And sometimes I just look at like, have you tried everything you can? Have you tried every person you can? So just go somewhere else. Like sometimes we have this belief that where we are is the only place. Also, it can feel like that with 110,000 people. Like I am in a huge corporation. There's nowhere else. No, there's many other companies in lots of places that you can go to. If you're not happy, if you're not aligned with the culture, if your values don't allow, just go somewhere else. Like sometimes it's going against the wind, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it's worth staying there and fighting and changing if you have the sponsorship and so on. You don't feel alone. And sometimes it's better to find, sometimes like in a company size of 110,000 person company, you can move to a different country, still stay with the same company, but go to a different country, a different team, and each one of those will have different perhaps norms, and you can choose very strong female leaders and say, I want to be part of their organization, and like it's not a megalith that it's always one thing. So you can change within an organization, or you can change completely. But I think that's a very, you have to trust, not just trust, but you have to have your own self-worth to know how far and how long am I willing to work towards this, and when is it okay? I've tried, and I'm worth more than the energy I'm investing right now. And when to switch.
Thank you, Toby. I would just to end our session today. I would be curious to know. I know that you're not using this title anymore as Chief of Happiness, but I am curious to ask you, what is happiness to you? What is your definition by leading so many humans, so many teams, and by navigating and sailing and by having all of these incredible experience? How would you define happiness right now in terms of life impact, not only for business, but for life itself? What does it mean to you now?
I am in a moment where I'm extremely happy because just last week, the Hub had a surprise retirement party for me. Knowing that I really made a difference for some people, that even though that chapter is closing, it was worthwhile. And I hope that I find my happiness in doing that again in the future. That whatever I do, it's going to be worthwhile to people. I also hope that part of my happiness is then to sail into the sunset with my wife on a nice boat and be glad that I had many years of being able to have a positive impact.
Kind of like that traffic light where you were sitting in the traffic light and you felt that it had that impact.
That moment.
But also more moments.
To be kind and conscious with myself that doesn't have to be until I'm 80, 90, right? That there's a phase where I can just say, I've done my good in the world where I could, and now let me sail.
And what's the next chapter like now? Do you want to talk about your next project a little bit?
Just to keep it brief, that Humanizing Business Network is immensely powerful. When you get a bunch of global companies together, and what I have to say is we don't talk about anything IP related, right? It's not product, service, timelines. It is how we want to develop and the human centricity in our organizations. There's so much power in that. There's so much energy in that. There's so much, like when you're working with the people, it's personal.
That's so beautiful. I'm so happy to hear that there's this in the world and that you're creating this.
And it's there, but we want to stabilize it because it was always on top and something I did on the side, right? And we really want to create this network.
And you say we? Who are you talking about?
Myself, and at this point we have about 26 big companies, multinationals, all working together. And I have a small board of advisors that are helping me stay true to the community while we stabilize and scale it. We want to involve more people. We want to involve more people in Barcelona, but also start spreading the message more virtually and involve more people globally, because there's such amazing stories and people all over the place.
And
so
assets,
that's going to be,
right?
and we want to create assets. We want to share stories. I'm also going to start podcasting just as a way to get people's stories and examples out there, because we need to set new norms, and the most powerful way is storytelling.
Of course.
And examples within context. So as a corporate, hearing what some cool little startup does is not as easy as saying, oh, okay, if Unilever did that with 450,000 people, we should be able to do it too.
Okay.
So keeping context, inviting more people, and going beyond inspiration. We love saying, we all agree, all those Gen Zers, they're a problem, whatever. We all can agree on a challenge. We can all start sharing ideas, but the most important thing is the action.
Yeah,
How do we get that into action? And that's the next part. We want to create some services with amazing people in our network to help corporates that get that. I have the same challenge. I got that inspiration. Now, what do I do next? We need to start focusing also on that next step of action. Yeah. And so we're going to look at ways to do that.
I think that in data visualization and in data, we talk about going beyond awareness. Because it's one thing to see the number, the other thing is to do something with that number.
Yeah.
And I think one thing is to see the problem, the other one is to act on it. And I don't want to just acknowledge that there's a difference in generations. How do I tend to new generations and make sure that they're included while still keeping business values or even changing them if needed, so they can feel that they're part of it, right?
Exactly. Yep.
So yeah, thank you so much for this.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
I could listen to you for hours. I have been doing that today and yesterday, but I would listen even more.
I have more stories.
And I am looking forward to hearing about the impact that you're going to make in other corporations in a few months to come. You're already doing that, but with your new project. And we would love to have you again, so you can tell us more about how that's going.
Happy to come back, and thank you for having me this time.
Yes.
Thank you, Toby, for being in this space, and thank you, Create What Matters people. We'll keep bringing amazing stories with humans sharing about happiness, about impact. Stay tuned. Follow us on Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts to keep creating what matters. Until the next one. Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao.